Hello guys, my name is Steve Mann. I was born and raised in Waterloo, South Carolina, a real small town, kind of close to Lawrence and in between Lawrence and Greenwood, South Carolina. Grew up hunting deer and turkeys came later in my life. I didn't get started hunting turkeys, I think, till I was later on in my teenage years, but just always loved hunting. Grew up hunting and fishing and things like that. I worked at Eaton Corporation for 40 years before I retired, but while I was working at Eaton, I met some guys that knew Neil Cost. And Neil, they had some of Neil's calls, and there was one particular guy, Harrison Forrester. He had a Neil Cost call. It was made out of walnut over mahogany. It was one of the best sounding calls I've ever heard of Neil's, and he killed a lot of turkeys with that call, and they would gobble to that call on those days when they wouldn't gobble to nothing else. And that's what got me interested in meeting Neil. And when I first found out where he lived and all, I went over to his house and to meet him and everything, and I went over and started just never entered my mind about learning to make turkey calls. I was just wanting to pick Neil's brain about how to hunt turkeys and things like that, and meet the man that could make a call sound that good. And so just started going over there and talking to Neil and getting to know him. And I was a big deer hunter then, and we just started developing a friendship, talking to him a lot. And I found out Neil liked to deer hunt, so we started hunting together, deer hunting together, things like that some. And the friendship just kept growing, and finally one day, after about, I think it was about almost a year of going over at Neil's a lot, I finally asked him would he teach me to make turkey calls. And when I first asked him, he told me no, because his health was starting to decline. He had picked up emphysema and things like that, and so I said, it's no problem, Neil, I understand, if it's going to bother you, or harm you in any way, I don't want to do that. And for a while it kind of went from there, but then I guess when it happened was I went with him to Atlanta to a Neil Cost NWTF convention in Atlanta that year, and the governor of Florida was giving him an award that night, and then Neil asked me to come along and film him getting that award, so I did. And that night, after it was all over, we went back up to his room, and he was feeling pretty good and all, and he asked me then, he said, do you want to learn how to make turkey calls? I said, well, Neil, I don't want to, you told me your health's not good. And he said, I want to do this. He said, I want to work with you and see how it goes. And so when we got back, I was excited, and we got started, and it just kept going from there. I would go over, I worked second shift, so I would go over to Neil's house in the mornings and work with him, and just about 5 days a week, basically. And so that fed into a relationship, a 7-year relationship, him teaching me to make calls and us hunting together and going off on trips together and things like that. And Neil was one of the best friends I've ever had in my life. I mean, he was the kind of guy, if he liked you, you knew it quick, and if he didn't like you, you knew it pretty quick. But he was a good, he really looked out for me, he really cared about me as a person. Yeah, Neil Cost and I found out we had a lot in common, I guess, and because we both lost a son. I think his was in a drowning, and my son was in a car accident and got killed. And they both were only sons at the time, too. So I think that pulled us together a lot more too. But we just, it was just a lot of. Neil had so much knowledge too about wood, and he worked with a lot of timber cruisers and stuff. And people that could look at a tree and tell you how many board feet they're gonna get out of it. And we would go pick out wood, and he would pick his, and he would make me pick my own. And sometimes I wouldn't pick as good a stuff as what he would. And I said, why'd you let me do that, Neil? He said, well, you won't do that again, will you? But he was just so intelligent. I mean, he'd been all over the world, he'd been in the Vietnam War. He had a big place in his leg where he was in a foxhole and a mortar came in on him. He was just so full of stories and knowledge, and he'd lived with Indians before for a while. He'd done all kind of stuff, and it was just he would tell me stories all the time. And sometimes I'd come over there, we wouldn't even go work on turkey calls. He wanted to go ride around in the country, telling me all the stories and everything, and telling me jokes. And he would take me out in the woods and show me places to hunt turkeys or deer that he'd hunted for years. And he built calls for like over 40 years. So, and I know when his health started getting declined, that's when it really got hard, because he couldn't climb trees anymore. And I would take him and build ground blinds for him, and places where I could drive him up to hunt. I mean, just I'd take him, drive him up there and let him out, and just let him sit there and call turkeys. And sometimes I'd be coming back to get him, and I would hear him calling, and he'd be working a bird sometimes, and I'd sit there and listen to him, because he could play a paddle call as good as anybody I've ever heard. And it was just pretty amazing to watch him work a turkey sometimes. But we just had a lot of great times together, a lot of good stories. And it was when Neil died, to me, it was just like losing a parent, because he was like a second dad to father to me, because he was treated me good and everything. And before he died, he pretty much gave me a lot of stuff in his workshop. He wanted me to have his tools and a lot of his old wood, and he wanted to make sure that I had my own shop to work out of before he died, because that's the kind of person he was. So, and it's been an honor for me to carry on his tradition, and I was very blessed and lucky to work with a man like that, and that had his kind of knowledge too. So it was just been a wonderful experience, and I've always missed him a lot. And but I know he's in a better place too. So he worked with Lamar Williams was before me. Lamar is a great call maker, and he spent a lot of time with Neil also. I think Bob Harwell was another guy, and Irvin Witt, I think, went over to his house and talked to him a good bit. There was, and there's probably some others that I don't even know about, but I know a lot of times I'd be over there at his house, and a lot of these other guys would come visit Neil, and so I'd get to meet some of his other friends and everything too. I think one of the things he told me that ever stood out to me, because he knew I was kind of a shy person, until I got to know people, he said, "Steve, don't ever let anybody intimidate you." He said, "They put their britches on one leg at a time, just like you do." So he always gave me good advice.